The trade deadline is over, but that does not mean the Pacers are done making moves this season. What can they still do? What will or should they still do? What might they consider that you haven't even thought of? And what dates are important for you to watch? We'll get to all of it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and Circle City Spin-In today. A lot to get to. I have lots of notes about what the Pacers could still do this season transactionally. The trade deadline is the big date that everybody circles and talks about, including me. And okay, what are they going to do? What they do? Okay, here's their team. Just kidding. It's never over. At that point, the Pacers have basically always done a little bit of tinkering and tweaking afterwards, and that often has some long-term impacts, including a move that, like, you'll think about as a very small thing the Pacers could do that is going to come up today because it is currently having a long-term impact on the Pacers from 2 years ago. That might be another thing they have to consider. You'll see lots of stuff today on all these. I like to bring up the precedent of what the Pacers have done before with a move like this, so you can see how it has helped them before or why they thought it would help them before, for example. But we start with the obvious thing, which is not always the case for the Pacers after the trade deadline, but it is this year. They have a roster spot, and the most obvious thing they can do and the most straightforward thing that any team can do at any time, in theory, if you have a spot to do so, is they can sign a player to anything, any contract. Technically, that would be legal. And as of right now, me talking to you, and I think this has been the case for now 2 days, the Pacers can afford a minimum contract from right now to the end of the season and stay under the tax. I think that happened on Sunday or Monday. I don't have my date perfectly aligned, but it is possible now for the Pacers to do so. Obviously, everybody's brain listening to this who's followed the Pacers at all this season will say, Quentin Jackson, that guy, he could be a candidate and should be, and I think the most likely candidate to get the Pacers 15th roster spot as of right now. But let me talk through this entire thing, the entire reason that this matters, right? Because the open roster spot allows for a lot of things. Of course, affording a player is a good thing. They can just sign somebody. Let's look at next year, though, because I haven't typed the names down of their rotation for next year since the trade deadline. Like, we all know it. It's intuitive, but look at it. Write them down. If you have a pad of paper in your hand, if you have, an Excel sheet in front of you, just do it, right? Tyrese, Haliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith, Pascal, Siakam, and Zubac. That's a starting five. That makes great sense. The bench, if no pick is gotten in the draft, it would be McConnell, Shepard, Walker, Toppin, and Huff most likely. Great. That makes good sense. If a draft pick is added, slide Jarris, Walker, or Ben Shepard down a unit, whatever, call it a day. Either way, it still works. And then you get to the third group, which maybe has Jarris or Shep, or maybe doesn't, of a lot of question marks, right? Cam Jones is not only a TBD as a player, but his contract is half guaranteed for next year. Kobe Brown is a very much TBD as a player. In fact, who knows if he'd even be in the NBA next year. His contractual future for the Pacers is confusing. Who knows if he'll be on the team next year. Johnny Furphy has a guaranteed contract for next year, but has a torn ACL. I think, to be clear, Cam Jones will be on the Pacers next year, but who knows what impact he'll provide. Micah Potter has a non-guaranteed team option next year. He's been a totally fine third center, but who knows? They don't really have a third unit of any sort of establishment for next year. And it's very easy now to notice this, but the slow trickle of Mathurin going away and the entire third unit being a question mark, and Cam Jones has been fine, but if they're going to try to win next year, is that enough? They're kind of low on proven ball handling, and they've always had depth pieces available to help them fill in emergencies if they need a third ball handler, but that depth has usually been Quentin Jackson. And if it wasn't him, they had Isaiah Wong or Ray J. Dennis or whatever. So they could clearly use, if they get anything with their open roster spot, even if you push Quentin Jackson aside, Q would be what they need, right? They need a ball handler. They need depth at guard who can dribble and create a shot. Currently, their second unit, especially if McConnell can't keep doing what he's always done next year, if it's McConnell, Shepard, Walker, Toppin, and Huff, like, they are light on shot creation with that group, very clearly light on shot creation. So those are the skills that, if I'm the Pacers, I'm targeting regardless. It just so happens they have a two-way contract guard on their team that is a good fit for that spot. But even so, they still could use two guys or backfilling another two-way there. So they could use another guard, and even on a vet minimum, they could prorate it right now and keep it under the tax. But that's the other factor to talk about here. Regardless, even if they don't agree that they need a guard, even if the Pacers don't agree with me that they need a guard or a ball handler, they could sign anyone in any position if they want, and they should. I'll bring this up a lot during this episode. Every team in the NBA, if they can afford it, should have 15. If you can afford to have 15 players on your team by the end of the season, you should. You never know if a guy's non-bird rights are going to become massively important in a trade. That's how Karl Towns is on the Knicks. You never know if a guy's going to stick and somehow miraculously be in training camp around your team for the next season. It just happened to Tony Bradley. You just never know, right? You should always have 15 guys on your team. If you can, the Pacers certainly will. So the precedent for a late season signing, providing some value, O'Shea Brissett for the Pacers. He obviously went through 10 days, which we'll talk about later. Same with Tony Bradley. Both of those guys signed a contract with the Pacers late in a season, lasted for the rest of that season, and both of their cases lasted beyond that year, right? Sometimes it is just a rest of season thing, like with Trevor Booker, for those of you who remember him from all those times ago, and then it's over. Sometimes they can last beyond that and have real impact. Wes Matthews was just that. We'll mention those guys for other reasons in a minute, but that is, you've seen precedent of the Pacers getting real advantages. Now, you might be thinking, why don't they just do this now? They can afford to do it instead of the tax, right? And they can. There is an advantage to waiting, which is two things. One is the buyout market, which we'll talk about this in more detail in a later segment of this episode. But by March 1st, players waived by other teams, assuming they're waived by March 1st or earlier, can play in the playoffs for contenders. So that's kind of considered the bona fide end of the buyout market. Their guys can be waived after that and still change teams. They just can't play in the playoffs. So pretend someone good wiggles free by that date, and the Pacers, if they sign somebody now, they would not have a roster spot to then go, oh, crap, they can't get that guy. And they could just waive their new player at that point. But if they've already signed them, they might have less space under the tax to afford their new guy. So waiting does make some sense. And we'll talk about another early March date that if you listen every day, you already know about, that is relevant here. But there's a reason to wait. See all of your options just in case. Jeremy Sohan just got waived. I'm not even saying the Pacers should have considered him given their needs, but like, he's young and interesting and not a bad player. Like, you never know who's going to be available. But that kind of leads to two, which is even if you wait longer, you get more wiggle room under the tax and could potentially sign someone else at a later point down the line this season. Like right now, the day I'm recording this, the Pacers could sign somebody to a 10-day. They would still be under the tax after that. Then they could sign somebody in early March to the rest of a season contract and still finish the season under the tax. And they could get a look at somebody else and then still add a player. That makes good sense to me as a way to do this. We'll talk about 10 days in just a second. But that waiting does have some value. So I do think the Pacers will fill their 15th spot. I don't think, despite them being able to do it right now instead of the tax, they'll do it for about a week, maybe a little bit more than that to go. What if they want to make two signings, right? They could wait and then have the room to do so. For example, they signed both Dwayne Washington and Terry Taylor on the last day, second last day, whatever, of the end of that 2021-22 season. They had to waive Kiefer Sykes to do that, right? They can always waive guys. We'll get to that in a second. Who could they waive? There's some options. But what do I think? I think if they do a signing, just a standard signing a player, Quentin Jackson is by a fair amount the most likely thing that they would do is convert his contract to a standard deal. Now, here's some little nuances. If you sign a player to a minimum contract, like using the minimum exception, that it can only be 2 years in length. But if you use the mid-level exception, which the Pacers have not used any of, you can sign that guy to a 4-year deal. So I wonder if the Pacers would try to give Quentin Jackson a 3-year deal with the rest of the season, obviously fully guaranteed, and then the next 2 seasons not guaranteed at all, like completely fully unguaranteed, maybe some team options in there. And maybe you don't want that deal if you're Quentin Jackson, but where else are you getting paid? And if I'm the Pacers, my goal with if I'm converting Q is, can I get his contract going into the 2027-28 season? Because as much as I've already talked about and been asked about in the mailbag this coming summer for the Pacers and their spending's going to be tight for the next 2 years. They already have a lot of guaranteed money 2 years from now, and that's even before any sort of choice is made to re-sign Ben Shepherd or Jarris Walker or things of that nature. So still a lot of financial considerations for this team for many years. And if they could get a cheap third guard for lots of time, I think they would like to do that. So that would be my hope as if I'm running the Pacers is, can I sign Quentin Jackson to a 3-year very cheapo deal with not a lot of guaranteed money? But if I'm Quentin Jackson, why would I want to sign that? Unless I don't think I can get paid elsewhere, or I'm getting paid more this year for doing that, right? How much more needed guaranteed this year for that pay bump? But that's what I'm doing, and that is what the Pacers could do. They could sign somebody. They could also sign a non-Quentin Jackson player, but that would depend on their needs and what that player is willing to take. So keep an eye on early March or really late February. The buyout market becomes clear what it is. That the end of the month is next Sunday. So the next week or so, we'll get a good we'll get a good picture of what the Pacers could do with their last roster spot. What else could they do? 10 days, waivers, buyouts, my predictions. We'll get to all that coming up here on Locked On Pacers. But first, everybody, I got to quickly talk to you about two great groups of people. First up is FanDuel. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? It's pretty fun. I was there last year. FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future. You will automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, it's the perfect time to lock it in. Futures this time of year, whether you're picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title, it adds that extra layer of excitement to every game. And now, not only can you pick for cash, but also you can be sent to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Let's also talk very quickly about Quo. New year, new systems. It's a time of year when many of us look around, see the messier parts of how we run our businesses, and think there has to be a better way. There is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. That is why this episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed. It works right from your phone or computer. Everyone can see the full conversation thread, so it's faster and it's personal. You keep your existing number, and they have awesome AI tools that log calls and summarize conversations. It's no surprise Quo is the number one rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses. Make this year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free. Plus, get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNBA. That is QUO.com/LockedOnNBA. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Back here on Locked On Pacers, thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Get Locked On Pacers ad-free with our new Everydayer Club. You get members-only Discord access. You can join at the URL in the description of this episode and make your second listen Locked On Knicks, because they already made a move that I'm going to reference many times. Jeremy Sohan, he got waived, the former lottery pick by the Spurs. He is now on the Knicks. Check out Locked On Knicks for how he could fit in there. That's very interesting to me. Okay, shall we continue? You can always, even after the trade deadline, convert and sign some two-ways. How fun. That is relevant with Quentin Jackson because he's obviously currently on a two-way. That contract could be converted to a standard contract at any time. Technically, that could happen to Ethan Thompson or Taylor Peter as well. I don't think it will. And the reason is, one, Quentin Jackson's better than those guys. But two, both Thompson and Peter have 2-year two-way contracts, meaning there's a chance both of them are on the team next year. They're certainly likely to be on the Pacers Summer League team this year at least, get a chance to prove themselves. Thompson has certainly something to him. I mean, he was in the G League All-Star game. That dude can really score, right? So I wouldn't expect that. This is mostly about Q and the same thing. But really the relevance is this is a thing because, like, for example, this is what I think people forget about when I talk about this. So let's say they convert Q. The advantage of that is twofold. One is he's on the standard team, which would matter for the playoffs in theory in future seasons. But two is it opens up a two-way slot. And that is where this becomes full circle and very funny is how many of you remember how Quentin Jackson even got to the Pacers? They converted Kendall Brown from a two-way deal to a standard deal in 2023-24, which opened up the two-way slot for Quentin Jackson, right? If Quentin Jackson has any sort of impact for the Pacers beyond this season, they were able to get him because they converted Kendall Brown. That is how you smartly use your roster in two-way spots proactively, and always do it when you can. Is you should just try to keep these roster spots going Dwayne Washington and Terry Taylor I brought up. They got converted late in the season. Edmund Sumner got converted. His spot got unfilled. Dwayne Washington and Terry Taylor turned into Gabe York and Nate Hinton. So less long-term impact there, but clearly converting Kendall Brown not only made Kendall Brown playoff eligible, which didn't really end up mattering, but it got them Quentin Jackson on the team. So the key date here is March 4th. I already brought this up. That's the last day teams can sign players to two-way contracts. I would consider that the hard deadline for any Quentin Jackson signing. A standard deal with the Pacers. After that date, it loses some utility because his spot can't be backfilled, but I mean, I think they would do it by then anyway. If a two-way player is signed on March 4th, they'd be eligible to play in 12 games for the rest of the season for the Pacers. By my math, that might not be perfect, but I believe that's the case. From that point on, the Pacers have 17 games. So perhaps they play 5 games with the Boom, then ride it out with the Pacers. If that is, in fact, the route the Pacers go, I think that's just smart roster management, right? Fill all 18 of your spots. If you can convert a guy and reward a guy, and he's actually good, and you get someone new in the building, perfect. What would they look for in a two-way? Perhaps another ball handler. Think Ray J. Dennis. Perhaps a wing, because you can never have too many wings, and Johnny Furphy is now hurt, and Kobe Brown's future is a question mark, so you just never know. Maybe they get one in the draft, but that is the considerations for the Pacers when it comes to two-way contracts the rest of the seasons. But this kind of orbit of Quentin Jackson currently being on a two-way and his spot potentially becoming open, that to me is the biggest remaining roster storyline for the Pacers if it comes to pass. Obviously, they could do something else, but to me, that seems like the most likely thing they would do. And those two things, the open roster spot I mentioned in the first segment, the two-way deadline, are intertwined in a way that made me think they were the two things to lead with for the Pacers and the rest of their season transactional considerations. Now, these next two are also related, but are a little more less dramatic, and more about, hey, what do the Pacers really want out of some guys on their team? Because something you can do at any time, literally any time, you can waive somebody, right? The Pacers waived Kiefer Sykes, if you'll recall, to open the roster spot that became Dwayne Washington / Terry Taylor, whichever one of them you want to say. The other one was opened up by Justin Anderson's contract expiring, right? But they waived him on like April 7th or something. It was like the third to last day of the season. At the time, you can always waive somebody if you need to open a roster spot. So the Pacers could do that. Now, that would open an extra roster spot beyond the opening they already have. Why would they do that? Well, what if they want to sign Quentin Jackson and a great player becomes available on the buyout market? They don't have enough roster spots, but they could. And you always wonder at this time of year who is and is not tied down, right? They're going to be evaluating a lot of guys the rest of the season to see, do they belong on the second unit? Are they playing for something? Do they belong on the third unit? They belong on the team. Obviously, Cam Jones, Micah Potter come to mind. Kobe Brown, who knows? But what if, let's just pretend, right? I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm not predicting this. Let's pretend from right now till March 1st, Kobe Brown really struggles, right? He really struggles. He's no contract for next year. Like, they could just cut him. They could just cut him and have an open roster spot, which they could use to sign another guy. Now, granted, they're so close to the tax that they probably couldn't sign a second player until late March. So they probably wouldn't waive Kobe Brown until around that time, but that's a consideration, right? I think Micah Potter has played well enough that what I'm about to say is stupid, but like, if they're not married to him as their third center, could they waive him? Maybe, right? This isn't on my radar as a thing to expect from the Pacers, but if this is mostly a Kobe Brown thing. If Brown struggles, I'm not saying he will. He's played, honestly, very solid in his first 2 games with the Pacers. Because he's expiring and it's unclear if he's in their future plans, perhaps they could get a look at somebody else with their last roster spot. So, again, not predicting this, just as an option. Waiving someone is always possible if you feel like you can use the roster spot better as a team. And one way to use that spot would be a 10-day, right? You can sign 10-day contracts. The Pacers signed a bunch of other 10-day contracts, hardship 10 days earlier in the season. Real 10 days as of January 5th are possible to use. They used 2 standard 10 days on Tony Bradley to keep him around until closer to the trade deadline. Tony Bradley's roster spot now currently unfilled. So as it stands right now, they could afford a 10-day and still keep Quentin Jackson, which is relevant for the sequencing. They could sign that 10-day player now if they wanted to bring them to DC for games, for example. They could also wait. And that's plausible to see their needs or see if somebody gets hurt. But what they could do, for example, is sign Quentin Jackson. They get to late March. They're not married to one of their back-end roster guys. They cut them. They have an open roster spot. I believe, if my math is correct, March 28th or 29th, they could sign a player to a 10-day. And then after that, if they hit a rest of season deal, with that last roster spot, or 2 10 days if they need to. Actually, no, 2 is probably not possible. Excuse me. 1 10-day and a rest of season would be late March. So they can use 10 days, but it's very tight with their spending. So that this is something they would either do like now, like literally right now, I think would be the last day, because that would last through the end of this month, and then it's time for the buyout market, or very late in the season to fill their last spots. But remember, if they do what I just said and wait till late March, they need to have 15 guys on the team by the last day of the season. So that player would have a good chance to get a standard deal by the end of the season. So 10 days, always in the mix. Let's talk about the buyout market and then what I predict will happen for the Pacers with their moves the rest of the season to close out today's Locked On Pacers. But first, everybody, let me talk to you about Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stack up, inboxes overflowing. The one position you have to fill, it's still sitting open. When the pressure's on, you need the right hire. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. They'll help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for with skills, experience, locations. You're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I'm going to be talking to you about Indeed, companies like yours make 27 hires on Indeed, according to their data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Spend less time searching, more time actually interviewing candidates, less stress, less time, more results. You need the right person to cut through the chaos. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this podcast get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Support this show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Pacers. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. This is a time for Indeed sponsored jobs. And we're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day, your second listen. Any team that interests you transactionally, for example, Jeremy Sohan already has switched teams. Cam Thomas is already on the Bucks after getting waived by the Nets, for example. Locked On Bucks could be a good way to go. So many. We're about to talk about many of those guys, because the last thing I want to touch on that the Pacers could do or that other teams could do is the buyout market. I already talked about this a little bit. For reference, if you weren't paying attention to the first segment, if a player is waived on or before March 1st, they can then sign with another team this season and still be playoff eligible. I believe Wesley Matthews and Trevor Booker, the Pacers' 2 most notable buyout guys in my time covering the team, were both waived on exactly March 1st, right? So that's a key date. There's lots of vets that could be of note or interesting between now and then. Now, the buyout market seems like kind of an thing for the Pacers anyway. Usually, the service of the buyout market is a veteran player who's kind of on a team that either isn't good anymore after the trade deadline or doesn't need them anymore because they got somebody else, or they don't want to win very much. Quite like they'll just buy them out. And so the money they lose from the buyout, they get back with their new team, and they can help that new team more than their old team. So the player gets just as much money. The team gets an open roster spot and some savings, and the new team gets a good player. Like, it's a win-win-win in that way, especially if the player doesn't need their bird rights for any reason. That's why they happen, right? So the Pacers don't have any buyout candidates. They're guys that I talked about that they could waive, don't make enough money that you'd think of them as a buyout guy. And it's not like another team is like, oh my gosh, we have to have this Pacers player who could be bought out, and the savings are just not going to happen. So don't expect the Pacers to buy anybody out, but do keep an eye on if somebody gets moved off of another team or away from another team, could they pop in? Is there anything that makes sense, right? Is there anything that makes, particularly in this case, more sense than Quentin Jackson, right? Would they actually get somebody, or both? Is there going to be a both situation where, pretend what I mentioned earlier about waiving somebody in late March? What if a great buyout candidate comes available? They add that player, and then they wait till late March to convert Q. That's also possible. Quentin Jackson, I believe, has about 20-ish, a little less than that, games left on his 2A this year. For example, I already mentioned Cam Thomas. Javon Carter already happened. He's on the Magic now after the Bulls let him go. They weren't really buyouts, either of them. In fact, I don't think anybody's been actually bought out yet this season. The last Pacers buyout, if you'll recall, was Daniel Tice. But like some young guys who swapped teams that are like, are they really tied down? Ochai Agbaji, the Pacers just saw him for the Nets in their last game. Sohan already got moved. He's on the Knicks now. Leonard Miller, an early second rounder a few years ago. He's on the Bulls now. Like, is he going to stick there? Would they rather have a roster spot? Isaac Jones just got cut by Detroit. Where's he going to go? Malachi Branham, I believe, got cut by the Mavs, right? Those are some young guys who are now on the market, who are recent, like first or early second round picks. Are they interesting to the Pacers? Would they like to get a look at them instead of their other guys, right? The Portland's going to have to waive some dudes to convert their two-way guys. It's like the worst kept secret in the league right now. Ron Rupert, he was not a kind of early second rounder, right? Those are the names that like are young. And if you're the Pacers, if you loved them in the draft, you maybe are like, we could actually get a real look at them in our building down the stretch of the season. What value does that have? They'd have to like them more than Kobe Brown, who is also a young player and a recent first-round pick, but he's 26, right? If Kobe Brown plays well, the buyout market conversation is pointless, right? Because they're not going to be 2 roster spots for the Pacers. I don't think they're going to waive Micah Potter. It makes no sense to me. So they would probably just have the one open spot. So to me, the buyout market is a thing. It's like hanging out on the fringes for the Pacers, but probably not something they would touch unless like the dreamiest fit ever somehow becomes available between now and then. And that leads me to my predictions. What do I think the Pacers will do transactionally the rest of the season? I think it's pretty simple. I think they're going to convert Quentin Jackson. I think he's going to get a cheap 3-year contract of some kind, maybe a 2-year deal. I don't know how much negotiation can really go on there. And that's it. I think he will be the Pacers' 15th player. They will replace him with a 2-way contract player. If you made me guess right now, 2 ways could be anything, right? Sometimes the Pacers go pluck a player off their G League team. Sometimes they go get Quentin Jackson from the Capital City Go-Go. I don't know where their eyes would be wandering. They snatched Ethan Thompson out of the Heat's 2-way system, G League system earlier this season, right? So if you made me guess right now of what I know of the Boom, Jalen Slauson would have a case for the Pacers' open 2-way slot. If the Pacers got to that point, they have some other interesting players on that team. But I think that is my prediction for that's all the Pacers would do. Convert Q to a standard deal, multi-year, refill his spot with Slauson or someone else. It's of less consequence who that is, but it's not. It's not. It sounds like, it's a 2-way lane in the season, whatever. But like that's what Q was 2 years ago. And then that's it. Now, I reserve the right to change this answer if Kobe Brown stinks it up or some awesome young guy gets waived. Then you and I, listener, can reevaluate the Pacers' interests, right? But if Kobe Brown's any good or no one interesting gets waived, then that doesn't matter. Then it's Quentin Jackson and a 2-way, and there's their team, and that boosts their team for next year because they get a good 3rd or 5th guard on the team who can play with the 3rd unit and perhaps backup minutes at times. That's a win. That's a successful post-trade deadline transactional cycle for the Pacers to me. And that is the end of talking about transactions this season. Until they actually happen, we will do no more predicting. We will do no more discussion of financials. We will only talk about basketball. And tomorrow, I'm not sure who, because I forgot how the Pacers schedule worked. I thought they played on Wednesday. They play Thursday. We'll have a guest, hopefully, to talk about post All-Star break storylines to watch for the Pacers. Then 2 games in DC that I'll be at. So fun stuff coming here on Locked On Pacers. Thank you all so much for listening. I can barely breathe if you can't hear through my nose, so I'm going to wrap this up quickly. You can find me on social media at Tony R. East and this podcast at Locked On Pacers. Back tomorrow talking more Pacers. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful day.